Ever wonder how, like, a a single number can, like, make or break the stock market?
Hmm.
Or, like, how about those polls that always seem to predict, like, elections with crazy accuracy?
Right.
Well, today we're doing a deep dive into the world of survey methodology.
Okay.
The engine behind all these data points.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not just about, like, asking questions. It's about asking the right questions
Uh-huh.
in the right way
Right.
to
Yeah.
get a real idea of what people think and do and how they even feel.
Absolutely.
And to help guide us through this crazy landscape, we're joined by an expert in the field.
That's a pleasure to be here. Yeah.
So we've got our thinking caps on and a copy of Survey Methodology by our side.
Right.
This book is like our instruction manual, packed with insights from the folks who, like, basically live and breathe this stuff.
Yeah. And it's a field with a surprisingly rich history, too.
Oh, I bet.
It goes back further than you might think.
Where do we even begin?
Well, let's rewind way back to 19th century London with Charles Booth.
Okay.
His study, Life and Labor of the People in London, was a huge undertaking.
I bet.
17 volumes of data on the lives of the poor.
17 volumes, that's dedication.
It was a turning point, for sure. Booth's work showed how important systematic data collection could be.
Mm.
Not just for, like, documenting social issues, but for creating change.
It's amazing to think about those early efforts and how they led to such sophisticated surveys we use today.
Exactly. And as the field evolved, the focus changed.
Okay.
From simply observing to understanding why people think and behave the way they do.
Hmm.
That's when things like public opinion polling and market research took off.
Makes sense.
Suddenly, everyone wanted to know what the average Joe thought.
Like unlocking a secret code to predict behavior.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But this quest to understand public opinion came with challenges.
Okay.
Researchers started to see that even small changes in wording could affect the responses.
That makes sense.
Like how a question was asked made a difference. It
Yeah.
could change the results they got.
Yeah, it's like the difference between asking, "Are you happy?"
Right.
versus "How satisfied are you with your life right now?"
Exactly.
One is simple, almost too simple,
Right.
but the second one digs a little deeper.
Absolutely. That nuance is critical.
Yeah.
And it sparked a wave of research into crafting, like, really clear and unbiased questions.
Mm-hmm.
A field called attitude scaling,
Okay.
which is more interesting than it sounds.
Okay, now I'm intrigued.
Huh.
So asking the right questions is key.
Yes.
But how do we make sure we're asking those questions to the right people?
Right.
That's where sampling comes in. Right.
Precisely. And the gold standard in survey sampling is something called probability sampling.
Okay.
It's all about making sure every single person in the population you're studying has a chance of being selected.
So no more cherry-picking people who'll just tell us what we want to hear.
Exactly. You want a true representation.
Okay?
Think of it this way. Imagine you're baking a cake.
Okay.
You wouldn't just taste the batter from one corner and assume it represents the whole cake, would you?
No way.
You want to sample from different parts
Right.
to make sure you get a true sense of its flavor.
Of course.
And that's what probability sampling does. It makes sure that our sample, the group we survey, reflects the bigger population we're looking at.
So if our cake is the entire U.S. population,
Yeah,
probability sampling is like taking a slice that has all the flavors of the whole thing.
exactly. And that brings us to a fascinating twist in the story of sampling its roots in agriculture.
Wait, hold on.
Yeah.
We're going from polling people on their political views to farming.
It might seem like a leap, but it makes sense.
Okay.
Before we were sampling opinions, statisticians were sampling fields.
Mm.
Literally to predict, like, how many crops would grow. They had to estimate the characteristics of an entire field without checking every single plant.
So instead of interviewing every stalk of corn,
Right.
they're getting a representative sample.
Exactly. And this method, called area probability sampling, worked perfectly for surveying people, too.
I see where you're going with this.
Yeah.
Instead of fields, we have cities and towns.
Exactly.
And instead of crops, we have people.
Precisely,
Mhm.
researchers could now divide up a region,
Okay.
randomly select some areas, and then sample households within those areas.
Ooh, instead of outdated lists of names or phone numbers,
Yeah.
so they had a way to ensure everyone had a chance.
Yeah, just like those plots in a field.
Exactly. It revolutionized how we gather data.
And it all came about during a time of huge change, the Great Depression and World War II.
Talk about a historical deep dive. We've gone from Charles Booth documenting poverty in London to statisticians using farming techniques to sample households across entire nations.
It's quite a journey.
And it all comes back to one thing: accuracy.
Absolutely, because in the world of surveys, accuracy is everything.
I can imagine.
But achieving it is a constant battle against a sneaky faux error.
Oh,
And I'm not just talking about typos or miscalculations.
really? What kind of error are we talking about then?
We're talking about any deviation from the true story the survey's trying to tell. And it can happen at any stage of the process.
Okay, now you've got me on the edge of my seat. Tell me more about this error and how we combat it. So, error in the survey world isn't really about, like, making mistakes.
Right.
It's more about the ways a survey can go off track even when we think we're being careful.
Exactly. It's like they say, the devil is in the details.
Mm.
Even with good intentions, those little deviations can turn into big problems in our results.
Okay, I'm starting to see why error is a big deal. But it all sounds kind of vague. How do we get a handle on it?
By understanding how it shows up, think of it like a chameleon.
Okay.
It changes depending on the situation.
So error is a master of disguise. What are some of its disguises?
Well, one is non-response bias. Imagine you send out a survey and only a few people respond.
Oh yeah, I've been guilty of ignoring those myself.
And that's fine. But the thing is, those who don't respond might have different opinions
Oh, I see.
than those who do.
Yeah.
If we only hear from certain people, we miss part of the story.
Makes sense. It's like going to a concert and thinking everyone loves the music just because the front row is going crazy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's just one example. Error can come from confusing questions, interviewer bias, or even how the data is analyzed.
So it's like we solve one problem and another one pops up.
In a way, yes, but it's not impossible to deal with. We have ways to minimize error and make things more accurate.
Okay, now you're talking. Tell me more. What are our tools in this battle against error?
Our first tool is good question design.
Okay.
It's more than it seems. Writing questions that are clear, concise, and don't lead people to a certain answer is so important.
Yeah, it's easy to accidentally influence people just by how you ask something.
Exactly. Even small wording changes have a big impact. For example, asking if they approve or disapprove of something
Okay.
versus asking if they strongly favor, somewhat favor, neither favor, nor oppose, somewhat oppose, or strongly oppose.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
Right. Those questions seem similar, but they give us different levels of detail.
And that detail gives us a more accurate picture of what people think.
Exactly. It's about going beyond yes or no answers to really understand what people are thinking and feeling.
Okay, so we've got our questions ready. What's next?
Data collection. This is how we get those answers, and each method has its own challenges.
We've come a long way from those door-to-door surveys. Online questionnaires, phone interviews, even focus groups.
Right.
Each with pros and cons, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Take interviewing, for example.
Okay.
In the past, interviewers had lots of freedom in how they did things.
Mm-hmm.
They might reword questions or explain things, thinking they were helping.
Wouldn't that affect the answers?
Exactly. What if they accidentally influenced people with their own opinions? That's why we have standardized interviewing.
Okay.
Everyone follows the same script, asks questions in the same order, and stays neutral.
So we take out the guesswork?
Precisely. We let the answers speak for themselves.
I like that. So we've covered question design and data collection, making sure we ask the right questions the right way. What's the last piece of the puzzle?
Sampling. We're talking about probability sampling. But let's dig deeper into how it helps us reduce error and make sure our sample represents the whole population.
Okay, I'm ready.
Great.
So we've written our questions, trained our interviewers, and used probability sampling to find our respondents. Are we done now? Can we share the results?
Not quite yet. We still have data processing. That's where we turn all those survey answers into statistics. We take all those individual data points and put them together to see the bigger picture.
So it's more than just math.
It is. We have to make sure those numbers tell the right story. We've got coding, editing, weighting. All of these are important for making sure our final results are good.
Okay, walk me through it. What happens to those answers after they're collected?
First, we have coding. Let's say someone answers an open-ended question about their favorite coffee. They might say, I can't even function without brand X coffee. It's simply the best.
I get that. I have my favorites too.
Of course. But to analyze that, we need to put it in a format computers understand.
Okay.
So we might code that response as brand X for brand and maybe a 5 for satisfaction.
So we're turning those detailed answers into something we can compare?
Exactly. But it's not random. Coding needs us to think about the research question and look for those subtle differences in meaning.
It's like translating a poem. You want to keep the meaning and the feeling.
That's a great way to put it. Then there's editing, which is all about making sure the data is good.
Okay.
We look for anything that seems off or inconsistent.
So if someone says they drink like 20 cups of coffee a day, we might look into that.
Yeah, we look for those obvious errors, but also for things like if someone keeps contradicting themselves in the survey,
Interesting.
it could mean they weren't really paying attention.
It's like checking a story for mistakes to see if it all adds up.
Exactly. And last but not least, we have weighting.
Oh, okay.
Remember probability sampling.
Making sure everyone has a chance at being selected.
Right. But even then, sometimes our sample's a little different from the real population.
Hmm.
Like maybe we have more women than men in our sample compared to the group we want to learn about. Weighting helps us fix that.
I see.
We give a little more importance to the men's answers to match the real population.
So it's like tuning an instrument to get the perfect sound.
Yes, we're making sure our results match the real world as closely as possible.
This deep dive has been amazing. I had no idea how much went into surveys.
And we just scratched the surface. Survey methodology is always changing, with people finding new and better ways to understand the world.
It's fascinating to know that behind every statistic we see, there are people working hard to make sure it's accurate and tells us something real.
Exactly. And we should always think critically about the information we see. Who did the survey? How did they collect the data? What might be missing from the story?
All great points. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into survey methodology. Thanks to all our listeners for joining us.
Until next time, stay curious.
And don't forget to check out the show notes for more information. See you on our next deep dive.